Welcome back to Next Level Rides. In today's episode, I'm with Taylor again, and we're working on this
something.
Yeah. So I'll show you what we've got here, and yeah, stay tuned. So, this magnificent automobile has started its life in 1994 as a 328i/IS, and it's been, yeah. As you can see, there's a little bit we need to do, and by we, I mean I don't know if I'm gonna manage to finish this with my own sanity, or if sanity's gonna relieve me of my duties. So, interior is completely gutted. And of course, we ended up having some issues in behind the dash. So of course the heater core decided it wanted to puke coolant everywhere afterwards. Taylor's underneath, if you can't already hear the dribbling and stuff. What's kind of alarming is there's next to no coolant in it, but of course you see an intercooler, so that should be cool. Taylor, thoughts?
There's a lot of things with this thing. Like looking at the front, loose hose clamp, good old zip tie for the catch can.
Yeah, that's
loose zip tie. Had the wrong coolant in it.
Look at this dirty filter.
Dirty filter, RTV spewing out the side.
Yep. So the good things about this, because we could be here for years, S52. So it's a 3.2 liter out of an M3, I believe in 1997.
I wasn't born before that, so I wouldn't know.
Okay, so we have no idea. So anyways, it's an S52. Now, originally I needed to get it up and running, so there's a few things that I needed to do. So of course, I started with them. It needed a drive shaft, so I measured for the drive shaft. So I had to figure out the wiring. It was a broken fusible link, so I ended up sorting that. Actually, I'll show you right here. So, right there. So all I did is I just looped it because the post was actually broken, and then up and over. So actually I'm gonna go over to this side just to kind of show another amount of ghetto-ness. Like, yeah. So I got it so that when you actually turn the key, you end up getting power and it starts the vehicle. I did an oil change. I did, what else? Fixed the hoods, latches, battery wiring and stuff. But then I realized this thing is kind of a heap of crap right now, and it needs a lot of work. So it's pissing oil out of the, well, coolant out of the heater core. So it's actually leaking. Here, I'll show you. So it's pissing coolant out of the heater core, which has now leaked here. It's rusted here, and there's actually a hole right there. Along with leaking out of the heater core, it's leaking out of the rear main. The turbo drain is a disaster. Like, it doesn't gravity bleed. It's essentially, it has an accumulator tank because it's a factory Active Autowerke turbo kit. Yeah, anyways, it goes down and then back up. It doesn't work. So as soon as you rev it, it ends up billowing smoke. It's a disaster. Valve cover's leaking, oil pan's leaking. I wouldn't be surprised if the front main wasn't leaking. So I eventually told him, because it's a buddy of mine, that listen, if I'm gonna be putting some time and effort into your vehicle, I want it done properly. So ultimately we decided that this lump is gonna get pulled. So the plan is we're gonna take all the fluids out of the engine itself. We're gonna pull the engine and transmission. We're gonna put the engine on an engine stand. He's gonna end up taking the vehicle itself to clean up the engine bay, clean up the interior, change the heater core, and once it's ready, then we can decide to actually throw the engine back in. Now, whether it's with this turbo or not, because I have no idea. I mean, we'd have to pull the turbo and decide if it's good. And really, I don't feel like putting a Band-Aid on stuff, so we'll do it properly. So of course, you look around the engine bay, and the first few things you notice is, obviously, it was repainted at some point, but they didn't actually scuff down the paint, so they just bombed over top of it. Stuff like this.
RTV through the catch can.
That is disgusting.
Yeah, look at that.
That's disgusting. Oh, look at the RTV right beside it, and okay. Here, this was meant to protect the paint some 10 odd years ago before it was stored outside, but of course being stored outside, it's destroyed the paint. So even right up top you can see Toast. Not sure what's going on with the windows. Maybe they just need a really good clean. The brakes. Yeah, there's so much rust on the brakes. The sway bar needed to be bolted in place, like up and through here. They didn't actually finish this new roll pan or whatever it's called, so it's rusting through there. It's a lot of work. So I'm gonna gain my sanity and plug away at this, and hopefully we can do it justice at some point down the road. I honestly think the motor, the S52, should be left NA, but hey, an old turbo kit is kind of neat, so we'll see. We're gonna start with draining the fluids and pulling the motor and go from there.
You want good news or bad news?
What's that?
Well, what do you want?
I don't think there's any good news with this thing. So
There
let's start with good news.
Okay, good news, the whole front clip's ready to come off.
Oh, what's the bad news?
I made a mess of your floor.
You fucking dink. Like it's pissing right on the floor and you're like, that's fine. I missed.
Okay, that's like putting a Band-Aid when you need stitches. Two
Wow.
bolts, front clip should be able to pull.
Yeah, and I think it actually, yeah, with these two bolts, this whole rad sport comes off, these bolts here, and then motor and trans. So we start by taking the front end off the vehicle. Now, most times with BMWs, you can take the whole front end and the rad support comes with it so that you can pull the motor straight out. But of course, as you can see, we don't have a whole lot of room, so we're gonna have to improvise just a little bit. So we take out the radiator and it ends up opening the whole front of the engine. But of course, you're gonna see we're gonna run into a couple of issues. All right, friends of the internet. I don't know if it's gonna show right here. There was a hose clamped right onto a hose. This is broken. That's been leaking for however long, and fabulous. And whatever that's torn. Great. So I didn't have the exact tool I needed for the clutched fan, but I improvised with a large, I think it was a 32 mil wrench and a flathead. So we're gonna get that off pretty quick here as Taylor ends up moving the harness up into the side. We're going around the side of the engine just to ensure that everything is disconnected and to make sure that we don't end up testing the tensile strength of any wiring or connector that we didn't end up disconnecting. So from underneath, we just ensure that the downpipe was all loose and taken off. Taylor was fighting with one bolt, so I had to show him how it's done. It was all jank and cross-threaded, so eventually we did get that out. Afterwards, we get everything out from underneath the vehicle. We slide the engine jack in, and one of us had the great idea of actually putting the floor jack just underneath so that we can actually hold the transmission and get it at least to a position where we're able to rotate it and try to wiggle it out of the engine bay. Now that being said, you're gonna see how it really did not work to our benefit, and it was actually, if I have to admit, a waste of time. But hey, you live and learn, and we know better for next time. So of course, because we didn't end up having one of those engine cranes where you're able to actually level it, it ended up wanting to drop the transmission really low, and of course it ended up hitting the firewall, or at least getting really close to. So I guess the whole reason behind the jack was to be able to manipulate it a little bit better, but I mean, hindsight, we should have actually just went out and got the leveler and made our lives 10 times easier. So of course Taylor jumps in the engine bay, and we ended up putting a piece of wood, and the transmission was sitting on the subframe, of course with the wood just to dampen it and not to dent anything. And past there, Ozzy was Hercules, I guess, and he decided to jump in the engine bay and try to lift the back end of the transmission. So since we didn't have a whole lot of room, we had to kind of turn it at a 90 degree, but eventually, without dinging up the frame or anything, we got it free, and it was able to come out and separated it from this pink hunk of, I don't know, purple material, we'll call it.
Woo! Woo!
Good job.
Good job, Taylor.
All right, well, that was a major pain. If it wasn't one thing, it was another. It wouldn't slip out of the little joint or for the shift rod assembly. And you couldn't pull it forward enough because the compressor of the turbo was touching the subframe. And then you couldn't lift it high enough because it was touching the firewall, and you couldn't this and that. So eventually we just had to lower the subframe, which in hindsight we should have probably done, but hey, There we are. There's the lump. I'm sick of staring at this lump. So anyways, this thing's gonna be gone. The motor itself, we're gonna end up stripping down-ish. We're gonna reseal it just to make sure that it's proper and not leaking, and that when the time comes and it goes back in here, it'll be okay. In the interim, we're done with this thing. I don't know what project we're gonna call it. Project Garbage? No, that's an intake. What are we gonna call it? So what do you guys think? What should we end up calling this thing? Project something? I don't know. Project Garbage? Project whatever? Anyways, let me know down in the comments, and the best one will win. Anyways, stay tuned for part 2, where we're gonna put this on a chicken rotisserie thing, and then we're gonna pull the transmission. Actually, that's a really tiny transmission. So we're gonna put it on an engine stand, and we're gonna be able to rotate it. We're gonna properly seal it because it's leaking from everywhere, so valve cover and whatnot. So when the time comes, if it goes back into this car, great. If not, well, it's ready for whatever other car it's gonna go into. Stay tuned for that video. I'm sure it's gonna end up being a part 2, and see how much misery I need to put myself through. So as always, stay tuned, like and subscribe. See you on the next one.
Every bolt I touch, I get this feeling that it is gonna snap and I'm gonna cry. Why does every bolt feel sketchy?
You know, I have a transmission jack in the attic, like an actual no, that's not gonna help.
I don't know, but I'm getting high as shit under here.
Cause I go high, cause I go high. Da, 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 da. So for obvious reasons, when we pull the motor, we're gonna get our head and limbs the out of the way.
Man, you need more sense of adventure.
My sense of adventure has come from sense of adventure.
Yeah, but you need to allow me to have those experiences too.
Oh yeah, great. Running you to the hospital because you were a dumb.
Well, at least you picked a place to live that's only a minute away.
Well, if it crushes your dome, and then I can say, oh, selective natural selection.
Exactly. It needs to happen. We're overpopulated. What is safe to latch onto?
There's nothing safe about this.
No, but like safe that I'm not going to damage the trans in a way. I can grab on the flange on the back. No?
Taylor, there's nothing safe about this. This is something you could never do on a carbon hood. It's making somebody cringe.